I would now introduce our last speaker for the session. This is Nataša Lacković, joining us also online from the Lancaster University with a presentation titled Relational Education, Not Education or Emancipation. Nataša, can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, we see you, so go ahead.
Fabulous. Okay, so it's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to listening to the remainder of the conference. And I also enjoyed the presentations given by Olga and Anna. And I think what I will be talking about actually gels really nicely with Olga and Anna's presentations. And I think some of the points that I will be making resonate really well, or even kind of reinforce what both of them were talking about. But I hope that I will also introduce some new perspectives. So what I'll do, I'll just start sharing my screen, if that's okay. And just check with you if you can see that. So can you see that?
Yes. Nataša, you can just press full screen. We can see it.
Okay, I will press full screen. And okay, yeah. Better?
Go ahead.
Super. Okay, so the content of the presentation is spread across these 4 points, as you can see. So the first one is about arguing for not emancipation or education, and why not, and I will provide 4 arguments about it. And then I will be talking about relational education, but mainly from the perspectives of relational higher education. And I will suggest a broader relational framework, and there will be 4 examples of that relational thinking, and also what it means actually to talk about and apply relational education, and how to understand what that means. And then as this here, I will briefly explain each aspect. And I think a lot of arguments are strongly informed by Charles Sanders Peirce's philosophy and semiotics. And then I would just consider some closing recommendations, or maybe just reflections of the way forward. So without further ado, I will move on to the first argument, which I think, again, I will say that it really reinforces what Olga and Anna were talking about. So it is about education as never existing without some overt or covert or insider outsider influence, and we can talk about it no matter how small, ill, or well-intentioned that influence is, or whether it manifests itself as a school of thought, whether it's a belief, or we're talking about a larger system and or ideology. And I would illustrate that with a couple of images, if I may. So this is okay. So I will just open a quote. So in the 1850s, the first class on Monday morning for all students at the University of Michigan was Greek New Testament. End quote. And this quote is from an article, from actually a news article by Makovsky, published in 1993. And this image is not of University of Michigan. It is a photograph of Oxford University Christ Church Cathedral from 1905, which remains a functioning part of Oxford University today. And we could consider this image as an example of a historical connection, or we can also talk about influence. So this connection is between the university and the larger system, and in this case, religion. So if we move on to thinking about patriarchy as ideology linked to concepts of female emancipation, we can consider this drawing that celebrates female Oxford graduates being able to be awarded their degrees at Oxford on the 7th of October, 1920. So that's about like 100 years ago, and almost like the centenary will be in 5 days. And although this was emancipatory in some way, and we know which way, this emancipation was exclusive to the people who could afford it. So we can say it was exclusive to the rich or the class that was financially dominant. And this class divide and economic divide is as strong today as it has ever been. Moving on to today, of course, universities and their practitioners and students are free, or better to say freer, or so it seems, or it depends which freedom or emancipation we're talking about. If we consider the profile of university campuses, as shown in this picture, the extent to which external businesses have entered and subjugated the university to market logic and operating, which is something that also Anna was talking about. This is obvious at every step, and I'm talking here from the perspective of Western campus universities. Of course, with this latest move to online and blended education, I guess we can sit and hope that video lectures won't be interrupted by paid advertisement. Moving on to the second point is actually the issue of nominalization. So you can see here an example of what nominalization is. So nominalization is a process where we actually remove the person. So a responsible actor, which is here circled as we, so someone, the subject who does something. So we analyze the data, let's say from the experiment in this example, and it reveals something. And then in nominalized form, the analysis of the data. So it's actually erasing the subject and the responsible actor. So in that way, the problem that we're dealing with here is the practice of normalization and vagueness, which is very, very persistent and very obvious in policy and management documents that actually avoids identifying human responsibility. And by doing so, it's effectively obscuring and sidetracking the potential for emancipation. Moving on, and I will be also providing references as I go through the presentation so that you are also aware where some of the arguments that I'm talking about and presenting where they come from and which references you can consider if you wish. So number 3 is that education and emancipation are effectively abstract concepts. And I'm referring here to Lacković's idea of empty signifiers. So the argument here, and I would just read it, and you can see that I'm using the background, Magritte's painting as the background in terms of thinking about the concepts in the world and what we mean by theoretical and things, concepts that we can call abstract. So the words or concepts of emancipation or education do not have a tight or fixed meaning or set of qualities, as these would always shift actually depending on sociocultural, demographic, physical, material contexts and needs and so on and so forth. And then the problem here is that this issue of interpretations and meaning, these issues are seldomly adopted as crucial aspects of education dialogues. And when we teach, do we think about it? Do we engage students in thinking about the meanings and these very, very different applications of key concepts when we teach our key concepts in disciplines and in education in general. So, and just here I would add 2 references that may be helpful just to underpin these arguments. Moving on, and again, another Magritte's painting, The Double Secret. So I was choosing, or I was thinking which diagrams or which images to use, because you may presume or predict, or you already knew that a lot of my work is actually concerned with how to use images or sensations that are beyond the verbal in education for deep and critical thinking. So here we're trying to understand what is happening in someone's mind inside, but that's very hard to reach. And education would invest all efforts to understand what people are thinking and encourage people to talk about things that they encounter. And again, this is linked to interpretation, to interpret things that we encountered. However, this is also linked to another point, or point 4, which is the concept of fallibilism. So what the concept of fallibilism argues is that no belief, and that is theory, your thesis, can never be rationally supported or justified in a conclusive way. So we're talking here about a conclusive way. So even if these theories are strong and convincing, and if we talk about practices as well that relate to emancipation or education, what exactly they mean and how to realize them can never reach a consensus. So that's a problem. And that's also the thorny issue of truth and existence and reality. So the questions such as what is knowledge, or what is truth, or what is reality remain. So this, of course, includes my own propositions that they are a part of this framework. Fallibilism is a contested concept for some people, but I would say, and I would argue, that it's not an enemy of education at all. On the contrary, it is a humble but everlasting pursuit of truth and justice that can lead to grand discoveries. And these are mainly, I'm just moving on to, just let me see if I can. I'm not sure why I can't move the presentation. Okay, it's moving. Right, so I'm just offering here again some references, and Nathan Hauser really talks, I think, in a persuasive way about these ideas coming from Charles Sanders Peirce. Okay. Sorry. I think I'm just having a little bit of issues. I'm not really sure why. Moving on. Okay. Sorry. So going back to the arguments, I think that the previous speakers shared, we should not, in spite of or in the face of all these challenges and difficulties, we should never stop trying towards a freer and better world, and education that can make a change. So that's why I'm promoting a concept, or suggesting a concept, which is termed relational education, to promote relational awareness underpinned by reflective, critical, and analytical thinking. So that also links to what Anna was talking about, but I hope that I will present a few new perspectives here. So the first premise would be that once the intrinsic interdependency among all humans, but also non-human world, is understood to be one of the leading directions of supporting thinking and critical thinking in education and across disciplines, this will in turn challenge behaviors that are, and of course, practices and consequences that are at the heart of injustice, oppression, and power relations. So relational education of awareness could be realized by, number one, semiotic relationality, or understanding that there are challenges of interpretation and how beings in the world understand the world. Then there is agapistic relationality, and some people would call it agapistic relationality, which is basically understanding that love and emotional life are actually key drivers in social behaviors, and they should not be marginalized or nearly taboo in education. So we need to open them up and aim towards caring, compassionate, and collegial environments. Then the next one is about ecological system relationality. So understanding interconnectedness in a larger micro level, as well as global system or interconnectedness, and one of the ways to do that and apply this thinking is to think in terms of transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. And then the fourth aspect would be in relation to socio-material and edu-semiotic relationality. So consider how human and non-human world relates. And I will be now talking about each one to follow. So in terms of semiotic relationality, I will just first quickly list 3 points before I move to the sign. So understanding of the world as interactions with sign would be one of the premises. And then learning and knowledge as interdependent systems of sign, and learning and knowledge as multimodal signs. And what I mean by multimodal is actually consisting of modes that are not just language, that would go beyond the verbal. And some people, I'm sure that, and I know that many colleagues would be aware of semiotic points of view and would be aware of Peirce's definition or sign model, the triadic relational sign model. But I would proceed to actually introduce it for the colleagues that have not come across it. So these are the basics, and of course the work by Peirce is so rich, so I can just really be there at the tip of an iceberg. So let's say if we consider human senses, so consider 5 human senses here, and how we interact with signs in the world. And what is a sign? It can be something that we hear, a word sound or sentence or music sound, a photograph. So it can be both verbal and non-verbal. So what we interact with is some sort of a form of the sign and manifestation, how it manifests itself in the first place. And then we, by interacting with it, we would understand what it refers to. And then we're talking about our mind interpreting it. So in that way, this is connected to interpretation and emotions stemming from the world of science that we interact, that lead to action. So our action is always preceded, so to speak, by our interaction with the world of science in some sort of semiotic or pansemiotic way. Moving on. Agapistic or Agapistic relationality. So this is something that is increasingly talked about, and some of the concepts that people use is education or pedagogy of care. Here, I would like to then emphasize the importance of talking about love and emotions, because these are really sometimes quite marginalized and difficult things to talk about, but that's exactly the reason why they should be talked about. And how learners, organizations, and society as a whole relate to these. And we can talk about quite, I would say, ancient approaches to it through the perspectives of philia as a strong connection that exists between close friends, partners, and family, and agape, which actually goes further as a relationship that transcends interpersonal and actually elevates the human to the level of love of and for all human beings and beyond the human realm as well. And just here I would list a couple of references there that also you can see strongly build on Peirce's philosophy. now the ecological system relationality here is finding some roots in psychology. And what you can see here is Brenner's ecological system model, which and in this case it is applied in relation to international students system worlds and how they interact. So in Brenner's terms, we're always and all the education, all the activities, all action is in this constant relation between and among these different world spaces. So there is a microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem, and they interact. So the most influential and the most direct is the microsystem at the center, where you can see here international students or students in general. And they what microsystem is actually them and the closest environment. So it contains the structure that they directly interact with. And then we're talking about mesosystem, where basically we're considering connections between the structures of their microsystems. So, for example, in this case, how they interact with, how, for example, admissions officers talk to advisors, how their friends understand the experience of students, etc., etc. So it's all very relational here. And in the exosystem, we're talking about influences that are not directly connected to the student, in terms of that the student has some sort of personal control or direct reach. So the academic requirements and evaluation are in a way imposed upon the student. And then, of course, the macro system is very important, that actually influences all the systems, and they do influence each other in terms of cultural values, ideologies, customs, and laws. So the third one that actually follows from this system model thinking is another way of thinking in this system way that actually puts the sign that we talked about earlier at the center of socio-material relationality, or interaction between humans and also human and non-human beings in this world. So we can talk about dynamic semiotic relationality of this socio-material world. And you can see here at the center is the sign that we interact with, all sorts of signs, as I mentioned earlier, text, language, music, visual information we are interacting with each and every day. And then these signs operate across cycles of production and consumption that all have impact of what we do. And this is, I would argue, very important to consider in education. And this PSC is basically this intersection of production, significations, or how signs make meaning, and consumption. And then this is positioned in this socio-material world. So we're talking about social, what I said before, abstract concepts such as culture, beliefs, emotions, economy. And then we're talking about more material world, which is animate and inanimate matter. So we're talking about digital artifacts as artifacts, not as representational artists, but they can be, of course, representational artifacts, and they do act as representational artifacts, but they're also hardware. Then we're talking about non-digital artifacts that we use in everyday life. We can talk about the ecology, the natural world, such as plants and animals. And we can also talk about the things that people are ready to go or enter the war for, such as water, oil, and access to fresh water, or access to good and fertile soul. So these are not minor issues. That's what I'm trying to say. And we really need to consider them. Some of the references here, sorry, I was just going back. I'm here building mostly on the work that I've been developing over the last 10 years. And these are the references that basically where you could find these arguments and also this diagram. And I would like to illustrate that, this kind of system thinking through an art project that was developed by Vladan Joler and Kate Crawford and adopted by MoMA in New York. And what they did, they basically developed this, and I'm sure many of you would be aware of it already. They developed this anatomy of an artificial intelligence system where they actually really tried to show the relations, the interconnectedness of that greater system, how everything is connected when it comes to how artificial intelligence works. And I'm just aware of the time, so I'm just asking to check whether I have a minute or two more.
Yeah, Nataša, maybe a couple of more minutes, and then.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm actually wrapping up. This is like almost the end. And here is an example of also all these different aspects of life. And I know it's quite difficult to think about how we transfer these ideas into education. And it's quite difficult to cover all the perspectives, but we can start from mapping these relationalities. And the final question is, so what? I mean, what would be the ideas for practical implementations, and what are implications? And I think this builds very nicely on what Anna was talking about in relation to critical thinking. So I would call this pedagogy of relationality that calls for an interdisciplinary relational critical analytical thinking turn in education, because this turn, as if we observe it as a whole, has not yet fully happened. And also thinking about these different literacies that can support that across discipline. And this is not easy. There are far too many disciplinary and other gatekeepers, but I think it's possible, and enough efforts can be directed towards this, of course, if people are also willing to invest resources as well. Then just a few final points, that this should not meet the end of individual disciplines. And one idea for higher education is that courses would apply peer and student teacher dialogue and assignments that basically foster this relational awareness beyond simple solutions for complex problems. So that would foster an orientation where basically students are not just regurgitating the pronouncements by the teachers, but they are, of course, doing the critical thinking and learning in these relational explorations of information and the comparative analysis that they can apply. Then this is also an orientation towards human and non-human system awareness. And finally, just to wrap up, I am looking forward to getting connected with everyone, and just a couple of things in relation to my work and also my contact details. Thank you.